GoForThe2.com in with the Week 10 predictions. Before I jump into the predictions for this coming Saturday, November 2nd, live from the Sports Grid studio inside the FanDuel Sportsbook at the Meadowlands, College Football Today streams 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. Check me out on Zumo, XUMO, channel 719, College Football Today, or go to SportsGrid TV, sportsgrid.com, College Football Today, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern, live from the Meadowlands. You'll get all the picks that are on this video, along with the other top 25 games that I like, and some of the under the radar games as the week progresses. So check it out this coming Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern, College Football Today. Let's jump right into the selections for November 2nd, week number 10. Heavy on the ACC this week. Let's jump right into it. Big battle taking place in South Bend between Notre Dame and Virginia Tech. Notre Dame got this victory last year as a 6.5-point favorite, 45-23. Notre Dame, it was 17-16 at the half. Notre Dame led before they pulled away. Ian Book had a big afternoon, throwing for over 300 yards in that Saturday night game last year in Blacksburg. Now Notre Dame coming off a disappointing road loss. They got blown out at the hands of Michigan in the rain, didn't step up. Offense only recorded 180 total yards. Defense gave up 307 rushing yards to Michigan. They now come back home with the college football playoff hopes thrown out the window. Their only hope is to get to 10-2 overall and playing for pride or spoiler at this point in the season. When you look at Virginia Tech, they're coming out of a bye week, sitting at 5-2, and has an opportunity to become bowl eligible this coming Saturday. I think you'll get Justin Fuente's best effort as a coach, as a game planner as well, and look for Virginia Tech to be up into this battle. This is possibly one of the ugliest 5-2 football teams heading into week number 10. But when you break down Virginia Tech, they've played much better as an underdog than they have as a favorite. Both underdog spots against North Carolina. They got a 6 overtime win as a 3.5-point dog, and as a 14.5-point road dog, got the outright 7-point win over Miami, where they forced 5 turnovers. Now they go on the road to face Notre Dame coming off an emotional loss. Virginia Tech has the extra week of preparation and has run the football in back-to-back weeks more consistently. Against Rhode Island, which was an FCS opponent, they put up 224 rushing yards. They followed that up with a 254-yard effort in the 6 overtime win against North Carolina. I look for different types of schemes, motion out of Justin Fuente this weekend, and I think Virginia Tech pushes the limit against Notre Dame and covers the number. In the end, Notre Dame, though, does win the ball game outright, 37-30 over the Hokies, but you're going to get the best effort out of Bud Foster in that defense. Look for him to mix up coverage, utilize some blitzes off the edge to force Ian Book into short throws underneath coverage and force Notre Dame to work down the field and limit chunk plays. I like Virginia Tech to cover this number and keep it close Saturday afternoon in South Bend. Let's keep it in the ACC. It's Pittsburgh on the road against Georgia Tech. Pitt has won 3 of the last 4 in the series by an average margin of victory of 3.6 points per game. This is a Pittsburgh team 2 weeks ago many thought can win the Coastal, sitting at 5-2. Then last week, as a 4-point favorite, they lay an egg against Miami. They now have to go on the road to face a Georgia Tech team coming out of a bye week and coming off their first ACC win a couple of weeks ago against Miami as an 18.5-point dog. They won that matchup 28-21. Georgia Tech, with the extra week of preparation, I think will benefit Jeff Collins and his offense and defense. This is a Georgia Tech team that will look to run the football and keep Kenny Pickett on the sidelines. Georgia Tech is averaging around 330 total yards of offense, 168 on the ground, and look for them to shorten the game against Pittsburgh's defensive front. Pittsburgh's defensive front holding opposing offenses under 100 rushing yards per game and has recorded 38 total sacks. but Georgia Tech defensively has played well in back-to-back weeks. What I mean well is they're starting to understand Jeff Collins' system, and you're seeing progression. Georgia Tech has held the last two opponents under 200 yards rushing, and that could be a benefit heading into this matchup against Kenny Pickett and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is an erratic team. They play against teams that they're not supposed to play. Dominant teams, they step up and get victories. And then teams that they're supposed to just walk over, they play down to the level of competition. I think Georgia Tech gets the upset here. It's going to be a tough atmosphere in Atlanta, playing on the road off an emotional loss. I like Georgia Tech to get the 28-24 home win over Pittsburgh. More sold on Jeff Collins as a head coach than I am Pat Narduzzi, and I'm calling for the upset with Georgia Tech this coming Saturday. Another big battle takes place in Chapel Hill. It's Sam Howell and North Carolina taking on Virginia, coming off a disappointing road loss as a 3.5-point favorite to Louisville. Virginia lost that matchup 28-21. They allowed 227 rushing yards to the Cardinals offense and now have to go back on the road to face a high up-tempo offense led by Sam Howell. North Carolina did get the victory over Duke 20-17 as a 4-point favorite last weekend. But I think this is a good spot for Virginia. Let me tell you why. Virginia's secondary has only given up 166 passing yards per game. Over the last 3 weeks, or 3 games, they've still only allowed 144 passing yards per game. They're holding opposing offenses to 34% on third down conversions, and more importantly, have recorded that front seven 32 total sacks. Now, on the flip side, you have a North Carolina offensive line that has allowed 27 total sacks on the year, and I think that's the matchup going up against the front seven of Virginia. Look for Bronco Mendenhall and that defensive staff to utilize some different schemes in the front seven for Sam Howell to read coverage, and look for them to utilize some blitzes off the edge. And here's the other factor why I like Virginia in this matchup. They have the more experienced quarterback in Bryce Perkins. Granted, he hasn't played well up until this point. He's been inconsistent, but he's still a mobile quarterback. He's the more experienced guy heading into this matchup. And I think the schedule could be catching up to Duke. When you just break it down, they played a very physical Wake Forest team in week number 3. They followed that up with an undefeated team in Appalachian State and lost that game by 3. They followed that game up with a 1-point loss to top-ranked Clemson, 21-20. They played Georgia Tech, another conference opponent. They followed that up with a 6-overtime loss to Virginia Tech, and then last week got a rivalry win over Duke, and now have to face another blue-collar physical defense in Virginia. I think this is just a bad spot for the Tar Heels, even though they're playing very well, sitting at 4-4. Look for Virginia at 5-3 to rebound, become bowl eligible, and get the outright victory over North Carolina this coming Saturday. Another big battle takes place in the Big 12. It's TCU on the road against Oklahoma State. TCU has won the last 2 by an average margin of victory of 8.5 points per game and won this matchup last year by 7 points. TCU coming off an emotional home win by 10 points over Texas as a 1.5-point underdog. They won 4 of the last 5 heading into that matchup against the Longhorns by an average margin of victory of 30 points per game and got a gutty, dominant offense and defensive effort against Tom Herman and the Texas Longhorns. On the flip side, Oklahoma State, I picked them last week on the road as a 10.5-point underdog, got the outright win over Brock Purdy and the crew. When you look at TCU offensively, this is an offense that's still averaging 376 total yards per game. They have a good quarterback in Max Duggan playing very well in the system, but he is still a freshman going on the road to Stillwater. On the flip side, you have an Oklahoma State offense that's balanced, averaging 264 on the ground with Chuba Hubbard and their quarterback Spencer Sanders, and averaging 246 passing yards per game. They have some playmakers like Wallace and Stoner that could stretch TCU's defense over the top. But I look to this Oklahoma State defense as the real reason why I like Oklahoma State in this matchup. Oklahoma State's only allowing 37% on third down conversions. That's on the year. Over the last 4 games, this defense has stepped up in a big way against solid competition. Over the last 4 games against Kansas State, Texas Tech, Iowa State, and Baylor. Oklahoma State's held those offenses to just 11 of 51 third down conversions. That's 21%. When you're playing at home, going up against a freshman quarterback in Max Duggan, I think they're going to give the football back to Spencer Sanders with great field position. Playing at home, I think they dominate this battle. I'm calling for a dominant double-digit win by Oklahoma State, anywhere from 13 to 17 points over TCU in this battle. Another big matchup takes place in the Pac-12. It's Oregon, USC. Oregon's won 3 of the last 5 over the Trojans, but they last played in 2016. Oregon stepped up last week, got a last-second field goal against Washington State, and broke a 4-game losing streak against the Cougars. They now go on the road to face a USC team that got a gutty road win over Colorado 35-31. Justin Herbert playing very well. CJ Verdell stepped up, made a lot of plays, and Juwan Johnson, the former Penn State wide receiver, had a big afternoon against Washington State. But this matchup's going to come down to the Oregon secondary going up against the wide receivers of USC, Michael Pittman Jr., St. Brown, and Vaughns. That's the matchup to watch Saturday night in the Coliseum. You have the Oregon defense that's allowing 107 rushing yards per game and right in the area of about 200 passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. They can play man-to-man coverage and like to utilize some blitzes off the edge. Can they get pressure on Keaton Slovis will be the question in this ballgame. You look at Oregon, though, in back-to-back weeks against solid quarterbacks, Jacob Eason and Anthony Gordon last week. They allowed 289 passing yards a couple of weeks ago, 404 last week, and now go on the road to face Slovis, who's playing very well. He's completed over 70% of his passes. He'll stay in the pocket to go through his reads and progressions till he finds the open receiver, and I think he can make some plays with his wideouts in this ballgame. You look at those wide receivers for USC, 140 total receptions through those 3 players, Vaughns, Pittman, and St. Brown. 140 receptions, 1,825 yards, 16 receiving touchdowns. This is a USC offense rushing for 145 yards per game, passing for 292 through the air. I think they strike the upset. I think it's a barn burner, one of the best football games of the year. USC gets the outright win over Oregon and hands the Ducks their second loss on the year. I think it's high scoring, 38-35. USC with the 3-point win over Oregon this coming Saturday. Let's keep it in the Big Ten. I was on Indiana last week as a 2-point underdog against Nebraska. They did not disappoint. They made plays when they had to. Peyton Ramsey stepped up. I mean, not only through the air, but made plays with his legs. He did not force balls into coverage. And more importantly, Indiana did not get phased being down 14-3 in the first half against Scott Frost and Nebraska in that matchup. They maintained their composure. You have an Indiana team that is bowl eligible right now. They're playing at home, going up against a team in Northwestern that could be shot at this point in the season. Sitting at 1-6, they lost back-to-back games to Ohio State and Iowa, 2 very physical teams. They're failing to stretch defenses vertically. They are only averaging 124 rushing yards per game, and Northwestern has won 5 straight in the series. Last time these teams played was 2016, but I think it's a tale of 2 teams. You have a Northwestern team that's going to need to go on the road and move the football through the air, and I just don't think they can do it. You have an Indiana defense that's playing very well. They're holding opposing offenses to right around 170 passing yards per game, holding opposing offenses in third down conversions to right in the area of about 38% of the time, and they have a high-octane offense in Peyton Ramsey or Michael Penix. If Penix can go, he'll be a dual threat, but if Ramsey's playing in this matchup, I don't think it matters. 2 weeks ago, he completed 20 of 27 passes. This week, he completed 27 of 40 passes, 351 yards, and made great decisions in the pocket. He has players like Hale, Hendershot. He also has Nick Westbrook. So he has weapons at his disposal, along with Stevie Scott, that can be utilized in the short to intermediate passing game. I look for Indiana to start fast, playing at night in Bloomington. They dominate this matchup by 20 points or more Saturday night in Bloomington. Just think that Northwestern is dead and buried at this point in the season. Another battle taking place in the SEC. It's Auburn and Ole Miss. Ole Miss now coming out of a bye week. The last game they played was against Texas A&M. They lost that matchup by 7 as a 6-point dog. You have Auburn that covered the number against LSU, an emotional game. They had LSU on the ropes in the first half, could not close the door, lost that matchup 23-20. They now come back home to face an Ole Miss team that they've dominated in recent years. They've won 3 straight over Ole Miss by an average margin of victory of 16.6 points per game. And now when you look at Auburn overall, I think this matchup is twofold. Where is Auburn's mindset going to be after losing to LSU? And you still have an Auburn offense that wants to run the football. This is an offense that's wanted a rush for close to 200 against LSU. They did not get there. They rushed for less than 150 yards against the LSU Tigers, and that defense gave up 187 rushing yards in the second half to the LSU Tigers. Now they come back home. They're facing an Ole Miss team coming out of a bye week. But this defensive front has played very well. You look at the defense overall for Ole Miss, they're holding opposing offenses to only 3.6 yards per carry, have only allowed up until this point in the year 997 total rushing yards per game, and 9 rushing touchdowns. So it's going to be not as easy as people think for Auburn to move the football on the Ole Miss front seven. And then if you're asking Bo Nix to challenge that secondary vertically, he's only completing around 52% of his passes. As a team, when you look at Auburn's offense, last week they only converted 47% against LSU secondary, but they're only averaging 7.1 yards per carry and right in the area of about 52% as a team in terms of overall completions. When you look at Ole Miss as a whole, they're running the football consistently. They're averaging 188 rushing yards over the last 3 games of the season so far. Coming out of a bye week, they're averaging over 200 in Rich Rod's offense. I look for Ole Miss to be in this ballgame from start to finish. Auburn wins, but it's a lot closer than the 18.5-point number that Vegas and New Jersey established. Look for Ole Miss to be in this ballgame from start to finish. I'm just getting started. College football is awesome. I just love talking about it. Follow me this Saturday, College Football Today. You can hit me up on Twitter at GoForThe2 or go to the website, goforthe2.com. See you next Saturday. Have a great week, everyone.